G'day everyone and welcome to this ServiceNow and Perspectium webinar. The title of today's session is Don't Break the Bank. And we're going to spend the next hour in a conversation with two of the best known people in the ServiceNow world. We're going to be talking about technical debt and data debt, what it is, why you want to avoid it, and how to minimize it. And you'll get to meet David and Chuck in just a moment. But before we kick things off, I do have a couple of quick housekeeping items to run through. Firstly, we welcome questions and comments during this session. Just type your question into the Q&A panel on your GoToWebinar screen, and we'll get you a response either as part of the broadcast today, or we'll get back to you afterwards to follow up. Also, today's presentation is being recorded, so if you want to go back and revisit some of it later, or you want to share it with some of your colleagues, you will be able to do so. And we hope to send out the link to the recording to everyone who registered in the next day or so. So I think without too much further ado, let's move on and meet the stars of the show. Firstly, I would like to introduce Chuck Tomasi. Chuck is the Senior Developer Evangelist at ServiceNow and will definitely not be a new name to anyone that's been using ServiceNow for almost any time at all. Along with being known for his amazing bow tie collection, Chuck was also the first ever winner of the prestigious Innovation of the Year award before he even joined ServiceNow. Chuck, thanks for joining us. And for those that haven't met you before, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on the show. It's just a terrific honor to be able to speak with you and David, whom I feel like we're getting back to some old fraternity or something in this episode. Because we've known each other for a while. You mentioned my customer years. I was with I was a customer of ServiceNow from 2008 to 2010. We did some basic ITSM implementation. I went to Knowledge 10. The attendance there, if you want to compare, was 500 people. Were you at that one, Craig, or did you come right after that?
I was at Knowledge 10. That was my first one as well.
You may have been the one who handed me the Innovation of the Year award, if I remember.
I don't think I did that one. I think I did the ones after that.
Okay. I know David was there, and
oh, yes.
it was a good time. And shortly after that, I was let go from my employment of 22 years before that, and quickly snapped up by ServiceNow as a technical consultant. I've done solution consulting. I've done many other roles leading up to the developer evangelist role, but always having a lot of fun sharing what I learn with our customers and with our partners and the whole ServiceNow ecosystem. It's a wonderful, wonderful ride to be able to be part of this journey. So thank you for having me here today.
Oh, no worries, Chuck. Thanks for being here with us. And yes, like you say, it's great to be working with you again. Fantastic. I tell you what, let's now meet our second guest and our CEO and my boss, David Liu. David's the founder and CEO of Perspectium. Prior to that, he was the founding developer at ServiceNow and the bass player in the official ServiceNow band Z-Boot. David, thanks for joining us too. What should the audience know about Perspectium and about you?
Well, first of all, I wasn't the bass player, but that's okay. It's still a guitar.
Oh, you're right.
You're right. Was Wally the bass player?
It was Wally was the bass player, wasn't
he? Yes. But that's okay. I do carry a mean bass sometimes. Hello, everyone. My name is David Liu, also known as probably the first demo data in the ServiceNow platform. I was there in the beginning of the days at ServiceNow, helping our dear founder Fred Luddy set things up, installing and maintaining things under the desk, and running our customers in the office. All the way till to IPO and a couple of years after that. So ServiceNow is in my blood. ServiceNow is in our blood. We are still in the ecosystem today. creating value for the platform. This is what we're about, and thank you for having me. We're going to talk about some very interesting topics today, very closely related to the ServiceNow platform.
Fantastic. Yeah, and actually, I should take this opportunity to remind everyone that we want you to be part of this conversation as well. So if you are attending this webinar and you'd like to ask David or Chuck a question as we go through, please feel free to type your question into the Q&A panel, and we will get to as many of those as we can as we go through the session today. So yeah, the conversation isn't just Chuck and David. Please, we'd love you to participate as well. But before I pass the baton entirely over to Chuck and David, let me quickly just introduce myself. My name is Craig McDonough. I'll be your host for the webinar today. I look after marketing and strategy for Perspectium and have been working in the ServiceNow world for some time, including at ServiceNow for a number of years, alongside both Chuck and David and many other of my Perspectium colleagues. But enough about me. Let's get to the topic at hand. And I tell you what, let's start off by looking at some background around what we mean when we're talking about technical and data debt. And David, maybe you can kick us off on this one. What is technical debt? What is data debt? And how do they come about?
I think technical debt is pretty well known, right? In the software development community, we shudder when we hear that, and it's always not because of ourselves, right? We always think about technical debt as somebody who gave it to us, by developers inheriting something from work that has been done before by prior developers, or sometimes developers doing that to themselves. Now, data debt is something that is, data debt is something that is quite new, and to be honest, it's closer to what I do today than technical debt would be, because by definition, it's how data tends to grow in an application platform or in a system that is very easy to use and very powerful indeed that gives you the application and the process that you run your business in. And over time, the data that is collected as part of the process in these applications just tend to increase over time. And that's the definition of data debt.
Makes sense. Chuck, anything that you would add to that? Do you see or hear about technical and data debt much?
I'm glad you threw the developer doing it to themselves, because I've been a victim of that a number of times. There is still an application running at my old organization that's been there for 25 years. I started writing it over 25 now, because I started writing it in late '94, and it's still up and running. Somebody has to maintain that, and God bless them. It's one of my best friends, so he gets a shout out for that. But you're right. The technical debt, I forget what the exact figure is, but we're like doubling the amount of data we're collecting every year, something ridiculous like that. It keeps going up and up and up. The amount of data you've got this year is twice as much as you had last year. So it just, don't quote me on those exact figures, but it's ridiculous how much data we're collecting, and it's only going to get crazier when you start thinking about the Internet of Things. So it is something that seriously needs considering when you're doing any sort of software implementation today. You need to architect that solution to not only address the technical debt, but the data debt as well.
Well, it's a measure of success, right? You're only successful if people use your platform a lot, and they change it and they customize it, and then it just becomes more and more powerful as more functionalities get introduced. And so as a result of the processes that run and the workflow that run, data is collected, right? Analytics is done, insights are gotten. And so I definitely look at it as a measurement of success, right? And the best environments out there collect the most data.
That's very true. Yeah, totally. I've got an application ready to launch, and I hope it succeeds. And although it doesn't, if there's not a whole lot of data as much as I expected. Yeah, very true.
It's quite flattering when somebody takes what you've done and takes it to the next level, right?
Oh.
By customizing it, adding features, adding attributes, and go, what about this? What about that? But what we're going to talk about, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, that gets into another aspect of the data and technical debt, because as you recognize new requirements and implement them, your data may change. So the data you had 2, 5, 10 years ago may not work or be as analytically savvy as the current data. So, it's something you have to think of over time, is what am I going to do with the old stuff that is missing a few fields or has a few fields that we've deprecated or something of that nature into the whole strategy of how you handle that.
Yeah, definitely. And I have a little story to share. In the beginning, right, when we developed the ServiceNow platform, it was an application development platform, right? It wasn't very clear about the applications that we were going to create. We were still testing the market. We were still thinking about, how to go to market. And so a lot of the early developer features that you see, business rules, triggers, schedule jobs, slush bucket, those things were created for us, internal developers, because we wanted to be able to rapidly prototype an application and try it with a customer and see if it's something that we can then productize. So we had to have a means of creating applications very quickly, low code. Well, it wasn't quite low code, and a lot of scripts, a lot of, it just gives me the chills to say jelly programming. If any of you remember that, Apache Jelly was the framework for the UI back in the days. So a lot of that happened inside of ServiceNow development. So, so that we can then take it back and make it into an application then that we can productize and then deliver to the rest of the customers. But as we support customers and we work with them, they eventually found out how we did it. So questions were asked. How did you add that field so quickly, right? How did you? And so, being good, good support and engineers, support and development engineers, we would then say, oh, that's easy. We just did that. And go, can we have that? And lo and behold, that's how it started. So, the update sets, the update XMLs, the right-click export XML, right-click import XML, those were all ours. We created it for ourselves. But it has shown that it was actually necessary to take us to the next level. So we just kept it in there and continued to make it work.
That gets to the technical debt of the platform is very flexible, and I've heard people say it's a double-edged sword. You can do anything on the ServiceNow platform, and the downside is you can do anything on the ServiceNow platform. And I try to employ this as much as possible on the ServiceNow community. Just because you can do a thing, I don't know who made this quote up. It might have been Abraham Lincoln. We'll say it was, just for credibility's sake. Just because you can do a thing doesn't mean you should do a thing. And developers need to understand this, because oftentimes they're given requirements and say, how do I do this? And I look at this and say, this is going to cost you. Now it's going to cost you to build, it's going to cost to maintain, it's going to cost for upgrades. I would push back. And unfortunately, some cultures don't have that ability to say, hey, I don't think this is a wise move. But it's something that needs to be considered as you get requirements, as you build this out, because it can come back to haunt you. We have a number of customers that have come back years later that say, oh, if I only knew now what I knew then. Our organization is not so special that we need all these extra business rules, all these extra client scripts, all these extra UI macros that do our process just right. And they've had to backtrack and re-implement from a baseline configuration, start over. And that reduced, I mean, that reset their technical debt pretty much back to zero because they're using out of the box, which makes your upgrades faster, which makes your testing faster, which makes a lot of these things cleaner. That's not to say thou shalt not create a new field or thou shalt not create a new business rule. There are ways to do this in a protected way, observing technical best practices that we've got published. That application that Craig mentioned at the Innovation of the Year in 2010, it still runs on Orlando today because I observed those technical best practices. I did not do anything crazy. I was using standard features the way they were meant to be built. Yes, it's a completely custom application, leverages the CMDB, and still works. I haven't even upgraded it since Helsinki, and it still works in Orlando. So that tells you, what that is a great way to reduce the technical debt, observe the technical best practices, assess every requirement, and starting from a strategy of, do we really need this? Can we use the applications that were given, ITSM, HRCSM, out of the box? I hate that term, but I'll use it because it's so popular. If I say out of the box, it means baseline as well. Use those standard applications the way they were meant to be used, and then start to evaluate, do we have specific requirements that we need to implement, and are they, is the TCO, sorry, wrong three-letter acronym, is the total cost of operation for this requirement worth it?
Yeah, like everything else, it's a mindful approach, right? That developers need to take, not only about what they are creating or changing, about the change, but take a mindful approach for thinking about sustainability, right? And we're going to talk about this later on, about the best practices, because I have to applaud ServiceNow for putting in features that are standard, right? Extendable now, less scripting, data-driven, configuration-based modifications. Those are the considerations that you have to make today. And developers like Chuck are the ones that can tell you about the best practices about how to go about being a mindful developer, right? And it goes a long way.
Yeah. Well, I think that really helps set the scene for today's conversation. I think that Spider-Man's uncle also said it quite well. It's a similar theme. With great power comes great responsibility. And so, yeah, definitely something to bear in mind as you're building applications. So now that we all know what technical and data debt is, let's take a quick look at how it impacts costs and resources. And Chuck, I'm sure you've been asked this question many times.
It comes down to kind of what I was saying before, is the impact on your resources is if you've got lots of specific requirements. Let's say we'll take ITSM. It's a commonly known use case. And you say, look, we're going to work on the incident process. Oh, but I won't say every customer, but many customers think their incident or their change or their problem process, or you name your favorite process here, is special to the organization. We used to have a term at our organization. We just added the suffix IZE on the end of it and says, we're going to blah, 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 eyes this. I'm like, oh, not again. So, and to compound the problem, I worked among a field of engineers who thought that it was better to build than to buy. It was just many of the applications that we could have gotten off the shelf, whether it was ServiceNow or some third party, software development tool or project tracker or whatever. felt they needed to build it, and it could have been in PHP, it could have been in whatever. It was just they were building technical debt over the years, and I applaud them for. I still keep in touch with that very good friend who maintains the 25-year-old application on a monthly basis. We have a call, and we keep up with this kind of stuff. What's happening at the old storefront? And it's starting to turn around and get better. But you don't want to leave your organization in that situation, because there's a high cost of, as I mentioned, developing those specific requirements. And somebody has to test. Now, granted, we have things like automated test framework that can help automate that testing, but still it can get into a lot of building custom tests for custom requirements that test custom features that you implemented. Like, wow, this is getting really hairy as you get down to it. So think about what is necessary. Think about, can I use this straight out of the box, whether it's IT or HR or customer service or custom built application. Obviously, custom built application isn't out of the box, but as you build those, and that's where a lot of my work centers, is around those custom built applications. I'm thinking down the road, how do I make this as bulletproof as possible to future changes? David, you mentioned data-driven architecture. That is by far the core thing I strive for. Anytime I see anything in quotes, I shudder. Whether it's a sysid or a literal string on a message, or it's like, this really belongs somewhere else, so I can translate it, so I can change it quickly, so I can delegate the maintenance of this business condition or business logic, decision tables or decision. There's lots of different ways that we've extended the platform since those early days to make this more data driven, and that is going to save you a lot of technical debt if you architect around a data driven structure. I don't want to use the word architecture twice, but that's really a big one as you think about how these applications are engineered and grow over time. Because I have a story from 2011 when I implemented. It was around that time. I don't know the exact date, but when I created a change management for a third-party application. They had this third-party application that was importing data, but they didn't have any onboard change. When they said, "Oh, I need to change, the instructor on this course, or the course in this curriculum, or the facilities," we brought that into ServiceNow and created a change management. I built it in such a way that no one's ever called me in the last 9 years to say, we need to make a modification to this. It was built so that all of that could be delegated. The decisions, that using common out of the box components like condition fields and lookup tables, and they're done. It was fully configurable. Never had to touch it again. They may have adjusted a field here or there, but still, that's trivial in comparison with having to go back and check out a workflow and make a change and publish the workflow. And you don't want to get into that business. As developers, we like to innovate. We like to create. Some like to maintain, but I think that's a small percentage. I don't really care to maintain 25-year-old apps that were written in Perl.
Somebody has to.
True.
Yeah,
David, how about you?
To me, the impact of anything, right, is directly related to the outcome of what you did. So I see different levels of technical and data debt impacts, and it's hard to really create a calculator around this, right? I've been asked, how do you create a calculator to calculate how much money and people you need to reduce the technical debt, and what is the impact of that? Well, it really depends, right? It goes in the spectrum of, on the really smaller side, the impact could be an annoyance, right? Why does this problem keep coming back again and again and again as I'm trying to extend the application or add a field? The problem comes back again. Oh, it's because there's this hard-coded thing that's looking for a field name, right? Well, we got to go change that, right? And if you don't, it's going to come back again. It's going to come back. So the impact of that is annoyance, right? Of it hinders you from going forward. And if you are hiring a consultant, right, you have to pay for that hour that he spent to do something in a better way because you had technical debt that caused that in the first place, right? So that's the lesser cost that is related to an impact of a technical data debt. I would say immediately right up from there, it's not very gradual, right? The next step up, the impact that you could feel would be something like you can't upgrade, right? Going from Orlando to Paris, right? You've made so much customizations on something that the Paris application now cause some data structures to not work, or the dependency of some workflow is now rendered not necessary, but it's still there, so it's going to hang around. And when you upgrade, you're going to have your commit upgrade would show you 75 things that you need to resolve, right, before you can move forward. And then when you get into the testing phase, you have thousands of things to validate because it's so different from point A to point B, right? So we just went from a minor annoyance, right, to now you gotta get ServiceNow support. And in order for you to do that, you gotta be on the right version, right, of the platform. And so now you are scrambling and you are organizing your time and you're delaying your future development, right, in order to get something upgraded. So you have to be mindful about these impacts of technical and data debt, right? Data debt less so affects the upgrade process less so, just because of how extension is used for data schema in ServiceNow. Now I can only imagine that the worst impact of a technical data debt scenario is when there's a mission critical app that is directly related to your company's bottom line of how you make money, right? You produce a drug, you make solar batteries, or you're a services company and you're in healthcare, right? So any one of those functions in your company gets impacted, right? It's gonna cause your company a lot of money, right? And occasionally technical and data debt comes into that impact, right? Because you're trying to use an application, and because of all of the customizations that happen along the way, is now causing you to debug very complicated workflows just so that you can approve the next phase of a production of a drug that is needed. And then that time you spent in debugging code, not making drugs, cause your competitor to come in and release the drug ahead of you. So that impact is the proverbial priceless, right? So it goes the whole spectrum. And so the bottom line is don't have as little impact as possible. That's all I can say.
David, can you talk a little bit more about the impact of specifically of data debt and of how data, how specifically data debt can really impact an organization?
Absolutely. When data grows, right, it directly impacts how you get the information out at a later stage, right? A larger volume of data means slower queries and slower reports. Slower queries and slower reports means slower insights and slower analytics that drives decisions and actions, right? That is the most direct impact that we know, because Prospectium lives in this space, right? We live to alleviate data debt. As a matter of fact, I think data debt is a term that we brought back. And so it's like water, right? Try emptying the ocean with buckets, right? It's an impossible task. But if you have a swimming pool, it could be achievable. all about metaphors.
I was gonna say that's an interesting one. Have a swimming
So
pool, not emptying it with a bucket.
yeah, but again, it's a mindful approach, right? You don't just say, oh, because it's hard to get the data out, I'm just going to start deleting stuff, right? It's not that at all. And it's not like because it's hard to get the insights from my reports because it's slow or it's impactful. You know, the process of retrieving the information is going against a larger set of data, and so therefore I'm not going to enter any data. It's not that at all. It's not that either. So we're going to talk about some best practices later.
Yeah, actually, that's a good segue actually, because we've been receiving quite a few questions, and one of the first ones that came in was actually specifically around that. And the question was, you know, what is the best option to reduce or remove this data debt? And is there a process that you can remove to identify data debt? And what do you suggest organizations do in order to sunset this the data debt that we've been talking about?
I'll start with an easy one. We've got archiving built into the platform. I mean, it takes your data and not really remove, but makes it offline, if you will, but it's still accessible. You could still bring it back as you need to. We've even got some new features coming into Paris. I mean, it's been around for what, a long time, David. It's been, you know, archiving has been around, but it's very little recognized until people run into, oh, this is getting really slow. Well, maybe we should do something about that. Table rotation would be another one. If you've got transient data that's just piling up, it's log files. You know what? I don't need log files from 8 years ago. Let's put in some table rotation. So after 30 days, it's gone. Nobody cares. We don't have to report. And that cuts things down too. So there's a couple of built-in capabilities. Other thoughts, David?
It has to be mindful. You're right? You can't think about table rotation and archiving as an afterthought, or oh shoot, it's happening, I can't get anything, let's turn on archiving, right? By that time, you've already experienced the impact. So a modicum of planning and discussion and mindful approach, you know, especially when you're new to ServiceNow, you know, talk about these things. You know, what is my data plan, right? Now, in addition to archiving, right, we feel that backups, which is a time-based snapshot of data, is also an approach that you can take. But, you know, personal plug here, right? Perspective does that, right? We allow you to take snapshots of the data and externalize it into a store that later on you can restore it back, right? You can restore it back into the same system, or you can restore it back into another system, or another instance of ServiceNow, but it stays around. So you can have versions of your CMDB rather than just one, right? And you can compare the versions between time. And that needs to be thought about as you're coming into planning your CMDB and planning to maintain foundational data, right? There is a strategy around foundational data debt versus transactional data debt. Like Chuck just mentioned, table rotation is very good for logs, but it's probably not good for your incident table. Right? You need to keep them around for a long time. So another strategy needs to be in place, right? You need to think about governance. You need to think about compliance, and you know your HIPAA practices and your ability to retain information for to be compliant, and all that factors in. You know, right from the get-go, it needs to be thought about at the beginning of your ServiceNow journey. Yeah. And yeah, so the difference is backups are snapshots in time. So it's states that change over time and has an ability to be restored, right? And for Perspective, it's just us, right? We have the ability to restore from into any instances. And this segues into the technical debt, how we solve technical debt as well. is that now that you've backed up your data, you want to go back into a more default application, right? You have a new instance with your new applications deployed, and then you just restore your foundational data into those new applications, and therefore you have just reset, right, from a highly customized, unchangeable spaghetti stuff into really out-of-box applications, maintaining all the historical data across systems. So that's backup and restore into a different system. So that's some approach. You don't have to do it with Perspectium, but that is the general idea, right? Exporting something into a snapshot and then restoring it into another instance is a way to get to very quickly to an out-of-the-box system, and also have an ability to reduce the data debt on your existing platform.
Yeah, can either of you think of, because often I think some of the best ways of explaining this is by giving examples of people that of organizations that we've seen do this, where we've seen organizations, reduce their technical or data debt. Can either of you think of examples, and you don't have to name names, but examples of organizations that have done this well?
One of them comes to mind that I did an implementation for back in 2011, 2012 timeframe, that had a lot of technical debt. They were going crazy with their ITSM implementation. It was large, I'm not even sure, very large. Let's just say Global 100 company. They're so diverse I can't even name the industry because it's all over the place. Two-letter company, we'll leave it at that. And about 5-6 years later, they were having the problems that David indicated, problems with upgrading, because they'd get to the next version. I think this was along about the Fuji, Eureka, Geneva time frame. Yeah. They said, we flat out cannot upgrade, and we're not recognizing value. And that's no good for us, because we want our customers to get the maximum value for the software they're subscribed to. I know if I subscribe to a software, whether it's ServiceNow or something more in my budget range like Evernote, I want the latest features that I get, because that's what I'm paying for. I get my Mac OS fairly soon, at least on my home machines, so that I can find out what are the new features and how can I leverage them. That's the same thing your organization wants, so they can maximize the value, get those features that can help do the digital transformation that is oh so important to every organization right now. And they ended up doing a re-implementation, and that was very costly. So, again, watching those customizations with that strategic viewpoint in mind, saying, do we really need this?
Yeah.
Well, there is a method to the madness, right? There are things that you can rely on. It's more concepts in engineering, in development, that you can rely on to avoid getting into those states, right? So before I get into that, to answer Craig's question, every customer that I've encountered that has been on ServiceNow for 5 years or more has incurred data debt, right? They have 6-year-old incidents that they don't no longer look at, but when they run that query and they click on that list, it runs the query that includes the 6-year-old incidents, right? And it adds 5 more seconds to the response time, right? So it depends on what you do, a report or just actively going through lists. It could be very annoying. But coming back to ServiceNow development best practice and concepts, very early on in the day, right? Because we were the first developers of the platform, we were sworn into a handful of tenets, right? That we have to do these things and be mindful, and they're not technical stuff. They're not like, oh, you have to code in Java 1.8 or whatever. No, none of that stuff. It's a little higher level. It's for example, one of the things we have to follow is to be consistent. Consistency over creativity or innovation, right? If there's a very creative way of doing something, but the existing code or application has already done or has already produced this function this way 5 times in a row, you're tempted to go, I'm going to be different and code it that way because that's new and interesting and refreshing. No, avoid, resist that temptation and go, it's consistent to do it that way, the old way. It's not that sexy, but it's consistent. And I want to follow that because when the time comes to change to a new way, you want to change all of them at the same time. You don't want to be the odd code out. So look for consistency in your applications and in your customizations and follow that, but have a team approach, have a approach that goes back and changes everything at the same time and not introduce one new thing at a time. And that's one of the reasons how technical debt comes about is every new developer that joins the team says, oh, I'm going to use a prototype. Oh, I'm going to use jQuery. I'm going to use, right? Everybody has their own thing. I'm going to do Angular. Now, pretty soon you have a prototype, Angular, and jQuery application. That is the definition of technical debt. So look at what other people have done, have a mindful approach and go, I'm going to do jQuery, even though it's like 10 years old, 15 years old, until the time is right when we convert everything to Angular, right? And that should be one of the tenets of writing applications. The other one, like Chuck said before, data-driven all the time, right? Configurations, no code, low code, right? ServiceNow is doing great introducing Flow Designer, Integration Hub, all those features that you don't have to write code, right? You put things together. However, you also have to think about how much effort it is to put those things together and how you put them together in a consistent way, right? You still own that, by the way, right? You do something in Flow Designer, you still own it. So you just have to be consistent about how you use Flow Designer across the board, across the teams, and be aware of all the data-driven features that it has, right? In Perspectium, we deliver a data-driven approach to flow data in and out of your ServiceNow platform. You don't write a single line of code. It's all, So I try to enforce that with my development team as well. The same tenet. The other concept that we follow very closely is a service-oriented aspect to development, right? Always think about everything as a service so that it's consistently accessed, right? So you want to connect to something consistently. You want to plug in. You want architectures that promote a service type of deployment, right? Plugins. You want to deploy libraries. You want to deploy shareable code that it's a black box. And I think of what you create is a black box that you just call, and somebody calls you, and you call somebody in a consistent way with very well-defined interfaces, right? And the platform allows you to do that, but you have to do that, right? You have to use concepts like the robust import set. I think that's what it's called today, to define a consistent, right? It comes back to the other concept, a consistent way of doing something over and over again. That think of it this way: if you hire a new developer next year and they come in, how long will it take for them to understand what you did? Use that as a measurement of your success, right? If it takes them 75 days to read all your code, now, if they take a look at that and they go, oh, that's Flow Designer, oh, that's import set, oh, that's, oh, I know, I got it. This is how it works. That is what you want to achieve.
You mentioned that black box approach, which reminds me of the story you shared recently about Fred Luddy, and one of his tenets was copy and you're fired. The idea being don't just take a block of code and copy it from this business rule to that UI action, because you've just duplicated a potential bug. And now if you
Yeah.
discover it's an issue, you have to go and find similar cases of like that's not the way to do it. You put it into a black box, you put it into a script include, you put it into some function that you can call from both of those locations. And you know, I live and die by that rule. Because
Yeah.
even if it's only used once, it's still it cuts down on the complexity of that business rule, of that UI action, of the it makes it easier to debug and unit test, and there's your modularity.
Yeah, it's funny for like 5 seconds, right? It's really serious, right? And that's something that I push on my developers as well. It's so serious that at that time we were even thinking about check-in validation that tries to match and see if you have copied somebody else's code, and then will deny your check-in, right? Ooh. But it became, too complicated, and it's like, we'll just, look around the room and go, do not copy my code. That's all. So we finally did that. Yeah, it's very true. Consistency, data-driven will get you a long way, right? If you created an application, make sure that it's well published with documentation of libraries that you've deployed, right? On how to do that, and evangelize it, right? Share it within your team, because the more people that use your code, the less changes that there are going to be, right, over time. And then there's a sense of ownership. And when the features are lacking, you get the feedback, and then you build on those libraries, and it becomes more and more useful over time, right? Take a data-driven concept to everything, right? In plugging Perspectium again, our integration application lives within ServiceNow as an application, right? There's no external interfaces at all. It's all data-driven. You define the data set that you want to publish out, and you just say go. There are no credentials that you need to set up for your web service to come in and then make sure the ACL is correct. You are the administrator. You've been given the rights to define the data set that your customer wants to have. You just define it and publish it. Absolute security, right? You don't have to rotate passwords over time, and there's going to be intermittent connectivity issues. Take those approaches when you're building your application by thinking about who's going to use your application, right? And make sure that it's the most convenient for them, not for you. You're an engineer. You should be inconvenienced so that they can be convenient.
It's funny. While it sounds like many of these suggestions might actually involve extra work, they're actually necessary to help you go faster, not slower. And in fact, I'd like to call on another one of my favorite quotes ever from Mario Andretti, who kind of made the observation that brakes on a Formula One car are there to allow the car to go faster, not to slow it down. And I think this has a definite sort of parallel into what we're talking about. Just looking at time here, we've only got a few minutes left, and we do have some questions that have come in from the audience. So I'd like to get to a couple of those if I can. The first one that we'll get to is how should technical and data debt be tracked and reviewed? It seems like a challenging effort. How should it be prioritized? And do you prioritize it maybe by the theoretical cost of not addressing it? How do you go after this stuff?
As David said, it's difficult to build a calculator around this to find the cost. Yeah. But if you take those 3 levels of approach, is it inconvenience, is it upgrade related, or is it affecting the bottom line? There's your priority right there. Okay. Mm-hmm. Is this technical debt impacting one of those 3 general areas? You may refine and define the way you like, but I love that guideline to start out with. Is that 3-tiered structure? That's
right.
Does that hit the core of the question, Dave? Would you like to add to that?
Well, I'd like to add that it's not a rear view mirror, right? Because by the time that you look at the rear view mirror and realize that you have technical debt, it's too late, right? Don't treat it like it's a measurement thing and a tracking thing that I have to do, but rather it's a culture thing, right? As a developer, do you have a culture of being consistent in your engineering approach? Do you have a culture of being data driven? Just on the get-go, have those priorities in place, and you don't have to measure, because it will be you will have the least amount of technical debt. Data debt is a different story. Data debt is a result of not having technical debt. Right?
I never thought of it that way.
If it's easy and helpful, it's going to come, right? It's going to grow. It's going to be huge. It's going to be powerful. Everybody's going to be plugged in. You're going to have 7 data sources coming in because you've been successful in reducing your data debt and moving forward, your technical debt, and causing application to be powerful. And so it collects more and more data. So with data debt, you measure by the growth of the data sets. Again, separate them out by foundational data, transactional data, and just transient data like logs, right? The biggest table by far in any ServiceNow instance is going to be the attachment tables, right? Mm-hmm. Evaluate what your attachment policy is. Do you have cap sizes on what can be attached? And do you have an ability to archive these things over time, or use Perspective to back up and restore into other systems and encrypted file systems as such? And then deploy and think about those right up front. We have an application in the store that actually helps you estimate your data debt. Another plug, sorry.
Excellent. So another question that came in from a developer clearly is she says, I've been in similar situations where I tell the customer that it's not a wise move to go down a particular path, and they don't agree, and they say, nope, that's the way we want it. What would you recommend? What's the best way for a developer to help their organization understand the impact of technical and data debt?
If it's already been mandated that you must do this, that's unfortunate, because it goes against better judgment. They've employed you for opinions, decisions, information, and experience. And if they choose to, say, no, this is something we really must do, I make sure I document those, even if it's just in the description field of whatever I'm writing, or comments in the code to say, this is what it does. I wouldn't be too belligerent and say it goes against my better judgment, and if they change it, I quit. But take it professionally, obviously, but sure. Make sure it's documented somewhere, so that if somebody comes back and says, "Why did you do this?" you say, "Look, it was per this requirement number. You can look it up in this reference. We had this discussion. You're covered, not entirely against consequences, but you've at least got evidence." And I'm a data hoarder when it comes to I collect things like that, and I make sure if I have some stance about what happened, I want the why and the evidence behind it.
Yeah.
I had a more extreme answer. My answer would be I'd walk away, because I would try to convince them, right, and say, if you want me to do this, I won't come back to fix it. Right? Because
you better have the clout to do that one.
Right, and then they might listen to you and go, really, it's that serious? Yeah, because I'll be fixing forever, right? So here are the best practices. Here are the impacts, right? Analyze it for them, right? Is it an annoyance that if I do this, it's going to be annoying, and then, hey, I'm going to be charging you, $300 an hour for the next 5 years to come back and fix it? Or, right, hey, if I do this, you're not going to be able to upgrade. Right? Use that, because the evidence is there. If you make these changes, it won't be upgradable, right? Or the upgrade effort will be very difficult, right? And then lastly, use the third impact. This is going to affect your bottom line of creating the product that your company actually sells, right? When the technical debt causes this workflow to not move forward, you're going to lose that competition, right? That's the impact.
And if you don't know, honestly, if you don't know, if somebody asks you a requirement and you're unsure if there's technical debt associated with that or potential technical debt, leverage the community, ask around. That's a great resource, and you will get various opinions from experienced people.
Yep, but follow your own tenets of consistency and data-driven, because there's going to be advice of just use this piece of code. No, don't copy and paste, right? Have your own idea.
Some good advice there from both of you. Thank you. We do actually have a bunch more questions that we're just not going to get to because it's 2 minutes to the top of the hour. So what I'd like to do is commit to the audience that we will we'll collect all of the questions that we haven't got to, and we will include answers to those in the email that we send you with the recording. So if we haven't got to your question yet, I apologize. I'm sure this webinar could very easily run for 3-4 hours, but we'll get those answers to you with the recording when we send that out in the next day or so. But I think with that though, we've kind of come to the end of our time today. Before we go, I would like to join David in shamelessly promoting a way for you to try out Perspectium for free. The application that we've been talking about that in terms of technical and data debt is a product from Perspectium called DataSync, and you can take a test drive of it for yourself at the URL that you see on the screen there. It's a self-guided live demo. There's no real person in there. It's something that David built just a few weeks back, and if you want to experience what the DataSync product is like, this is the way you can do it. Just datasyncdemo.perspectium.net is the URL to go to. So please, check that out if you want to see what the DataSync product actually looks like and how it works in the real world. But aside from all of that, thank you for joining us. I trust you found this webinar informative. I trust that you were able to pick out a few fresh ideas that you can use to minimize both technical and data debt in your ServiceNow environment. And of course, a huge thank you to Chuck from ServiceNow and David from Perspectium for sharing your stories, your insight and your experience with us in today's session. Thank you both so much.
My pleasure.
I want to also say, don't miss Chuck's new podcast called Breakpoint.
Oh yeah.
Going to be done bi-weekly. So catch that in iTunes.
Well, thank you. It is ServiceNow Developer Podcast. It's just launched, so if it's not on your favorite podcast directory as of late July, should be by early August of 2020. So go subscribe, listen. We're going to have interesting conversations, and we will most definitely be putting the audio for this discussion on that as well. So look forward to talking to you there.
Yeah,
thank you.
We'll actually include a reminder about that in the email as well that we send out to you after this to this webinar. As I mentioned though at the start of this session, this webinar has been recorded. We will forward a copy of it out to you in the next day or so. Feel free to share it with your friends and your colleagues. In the meantime, if you'd like to read some customer stories or learn more about Perspectium or ServiceNow, please visit our websites at either perspectium.com or servicenow.com, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.